Okay, we are in Proverbs 13 today, and we will handle Proverbs 13 the same way that we have done these recent chapters. The first 9 chapters, of course, had some more flow to them, some more unity to them, one section to the next, and that is not so much the case here in chapters 10 to 22. As I said a few minutes ago, and I'll say again now, there will be no Wednesday morning Bible study next week due to the fact that I have a ton of work to do for VBS. I don't feel I can do them both well, and we're not in a hurry here on Wednesday morning Bible study, are we? So Proverbs 13 this week off next week, and then we'll be back hopefully chapter 14. So Proverbs 13 has 25 verses, and so we're going to go round robin again like we have. And so I will begin with verse 1 of Proverbs 13, and then we'll go to Steve and Sherry, and then Todd, and then Norm and Nancy, and then Bob, and then Tasha, and then over to Heather, and then to Liz, and then we'll go over here to Charlotte, and then Dixie, and then Jeff, and then John, and then Deborah and Bill, and we'll see how far we get, and if there's still more, we'll start again and go back this way. As I said last week and the week before, if there's an awkward silence, it probably means it's your turn to read. And there are a few of these again. As I said, sometimes the translation is a little bit uncertain in a few of these phrases because you have so little context to go with. So you want to follow along carefully because somebody else's translation of a certain verse might be different than yours, and you might not catch your cue. So pay attention, and we'll roll with it here. Proverbs 13. I'll start with verse 1. A wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a mocker does not listen to rebuke.
Wise words will win you a good meal, but treacherous people have an appetite for violence.
The one who guards his mouth preserves his life. The one who opens wide his lips comes to ruin.
The appetite of the lazy craves and gets nothing, while the appetite of the diligent is richly supplied.
The righteous hate what is false, but the wicked make themselves a stench and bring shame on themselves.
Righteousness guards the person of integrity, but the wickedness overthrows the sinner.
One pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth.
A person's riches may bring some good life, but the poor do not respond to threatening rebukes. The light of the righteous shines brightly, but the lamp of the wicked is snuffed out.
Pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise.
Wealth from get rich quick schemes quickly disappears. Wealth from hard work grows over time.
Whoso despiseth the word shall be destroyed, and he that feareth the commandment shall be rewarded.
The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, turning a man from the snares of death.
Good understanding wins favor, but the way of the unfaithful is hard.
Every prudent man acts out of knowledge, but a fool exposes his folly.
A wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a trustworthy envoy brings healing.
If you ignore criticism, you will end in poverty and disgrace. If you accept correction, you will be honored.
Desire realized is sweet to the soul, but it is an abomination to fools to turn away from evil.
All right, and
Verse 20.
20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm.
Trouble pursues the sinner, but the righteous are rewarded with good things.
A good person leaves an inheritance for the children's children, but a sinner dwells still with for the righteous.
The fallow ground of the poor will yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice.
Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but those who love their children is careful to discipline them. The righteous eat to their heart's content, but the stomach of the wicked goes hungry.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That was Proverbs 13. You'll notice in here a number, and I've tried to outline some of these on the board here, some of the themes that are brought up again. A lot of these we've seen before. I might bring up, to start with today, a theme that really I didn't label on the board because I didn't really get into it until my research last night, but the theme of satisfaction of cravings. A number of these verses in black actually deal with this, but I'm just going to highlight a few here. Verse 2, from the fruit of his lips a man enjoys good things, but the unfaithful have a craving for violence. You might see also verse 4, the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. And there are other things about cravings and desires, even the verse about hope deferred makes the heart sick, but longing fulfilled is the tree of life. So the theme about desires and satisfaction of desires goes all the way on through this chapter, along with other things on the board. I guess I want to begin with verses particularly that stick out to you, or questions you have, or observations or whatever, and then we can deal with some of the verses that I've marked particularly that I'd like to dig into together this morning. So any general impressions or questions or verses that stick to you? Yes, Norm.
I like the get-rich-quick schemes because
Yes.
it becomes very prevalent now with the false phone calls you get.
Yes, yes. So remind me which verse that is there. That was number 11 there. Yes, yes. So dishonest money in Charlotte's translation was get-rich-quick schemes, which is a good translation in the sense that it echoes back here to chapter 1. Remember in chapter 1, the gang was saying, join with us, and we're going to murder this guy and steal his stuff, and we'll be wealthy, and we'll have community together. It'll be great. So these kinds of schemes are not going to endure. Dishonest money, in verse 11, dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. This is an interesting thing, and really Jesus speaks to this. You try to save your life, you'll lose it. You lay down your life for my sake, you'll find it. So there's this constant temptation to get something quickly or to go about it the wrong way. I think about Eve with the fruit in the garden. And some of what she wanted was not altogether off base there, but the way in which she went about it and what she did, especially given what God had said, was not right. So we have this tendency to go after something because we want it and not think about whether this is the right time, the right way to go about this. Proverbs, again, is not against wealth or money in general. It's against going about things in the wrong way.
How about the paradox in verse 7? One person pretends to be rich and has nothing.
Yes.
But another pretends to be poor and has great wealth.
Yes, so Norm mentions verse 7. One man pretends to be rich but has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, it has great wealth. There's actually a cluster of a few verses here that I identified. 7, 9, and 11 are all about appearances. And sometimes appearances aren't exactly what you would think. So verse 7, the person that's acting like they're rich but actually has nothing. The person that's acting as though they're poor, he actually has great wealth. And then you have verse 9, the light of the righteous shines brightly, but the lamp of the wicked is snuffed out. And then verse 11, dishonest money and then gathering little by little. It looks like the good thing is to get the money right away, but actually the wise thing is to go after it slowly and gradually and the right way. So all three of those things have to do with appearances and reality being otherwise. But back to the verse that Norm brought up there in verse 7, one man pretends to be rich yet has nothing, another pretends to be poor yet has great wealth. This is really more of an observation of the way things are rather than a command. It's just kind of the way life works. So I can think of a few examples here. There was a lady in my grandparents' church, the church my parents grew up in St. Louis, and she and her family were very wealthy. And everybody knew they were very wealthy. But the way she dressed, you would have no clue. She was dressed as simply and as modestly as anybody could be, and just a humble family and humble people, and very kind and gracious, and yet they were remarkably wealthy. And you wouldn't know it by their way of living. That would be a favorable thing. Has a lot of wealth, but using it in ways that are generous and gracious and kind, and so no pretense at all about there. Yes, Norm.
I think of the story of somebody on the coast and the janitor that for years worked at a school and everything, no relatives and everything, and then he left a wealth of money to the school.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah.
He's a janitor.
Yeah, yeah, so Norman's talking about an unsuspecting janitor at a school who had no family, ended up leaving a huge amount of money to a school, and no one had any idea. And wouldn't that be great, to live in such a way where people couldn't tell how many resources you have? Just to live in such a way, just simple and content and grateful. And then the thing is, when you do that, you actually have more resources that you can give to kingdom things. And so it calls us to a kind of simplicity at the back half of verse 7. The front part of verse 7, one man pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. When I read this line, and over the last couple of years, I've read a couple of biographies about President Jefferson, President Washington, and the culture from which they came, the wealthy of Virginia in the colonial era, many of them were putting up a facade of being quite wealthy when actually they were tremendously indebted and very reliant on their slave labor to keep that image up. And there was a lot of anxiety about making ends meet, so they were land rich and rich in terms of their appearances and the kinds of parties and banquets they would throw, but actually they were struggling deeply. And again, some of these people have done some wonderful things for our country. I don't mean to condemn them wholeheartedly, but that way of being was a very pretentious way of being in colonial Virginia. Some of these wealthy plantation owners were actually not in very good situations financially. And there's folly in that, Proverbs whispers, pretending to be rich when you're actually not. So yeah, appearances can deceive you, and so it is here in verse 7. Other questions or comments about that, or any other place? Yes, Bill.
Well, I noticed 13:1 and 12:1 have a lot of similarities in there. A wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a mocker does not listen to rebuke.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid.
Okay.
To me, there was a lot of similarities.
Yes. So Bill is pointing out rightly that the beginning of chapter 12 and the beginning of chapter 13:1 and 12:1, very similar verse there about the one who loves discipline or knowledge, or on the other hand hates correction, or here in verse 13:1, the one who heeds his father's instruction, or the one who doesn't listen to rebuke. Again, back to this appearance thing, there's a certain strand within Proverbs where the fool thinks he's got it all together. I don't need correction. I don't need teaching. I don't need discipline. I don't want that. I'm fine the way I am. But the wise person owns up to his need for that. I need correction. I need to learn. I need to grow. The Lord is still showing me things in my heart that need to be changed. And so the wise son embraces that, and it works out well. On the surface, discipline is no fun. Correction is no fun. I can't think of a time, actually, where I really have appreciated being rebuked. Oh, it's a good time, But I have in the long run, like not in the moment, but later on. Lord, I thank you for showing me that. And very, very often, Lord, I thank you for showing me that on a smaller scale way before I really blew it big time. Like he exposes things in our hearts. And so if you and I have a posture of continually inviting the Lord to correct us, he will have the grace to correct us in some of those smaller scale things, if you will, before we do greater damage with our way of being. Yes, Liz. Yeah. He who walks with the wise becomes wise, and a companion of fools suffers harm. That's verse 20. And who are we putting ourselves in a position to interact with? And how are we choosing to let ourselves be shaped? I think it's an important way of thinking. And to think about that in terms of all of the media we consume as well. Who are the voices that we're deliberately hanging out with, that we're deliberately exposing our ears to, and what are those voices saying, and how are they shaping us? And to give thought to that, and to give thought to which voices and how much and how often, and then the kinds of people we're hanging out with. We want to hang out with some people that are also trying to follow Jesus and take this business of wisdom seriously, so that we also will be shaped by that. Now, as soon as I say all of that, we have to also acknowledge a teaching of Jesus even, where he gets criticism. Probably people were quoting Proverbs 13:20 to Jesus when he was hanging out with Zacchaeus and people like that, and saying, "You are the companion of fools. What are you doing?" And so there is a time and place, an important time and place, for the follower of Christ to minister to people that are not living in ways that are wise. So that's an important teaching in Scripture we have. Yet we also have this reminder of what kind of company are you voluntarily keeping, what kind of people are you hanging out with, what kind of voices are you invited to influence your heart, your life, and how is that shaping you? And to be able to step back and acknowledge that all of the people I hang out with and all of the voices that I listen to on a regular basis do in fact shape me, whether I acknowledge it or not. And is this shaping a good shaping? Is this healthy, both in terms of its content and its extent? Who am I listening to and why? Yes, Bill.
But in the matter of, are you being an influence or are you being influenced? And Jesus was constantly being an influence to other people.
Yeah.
Instead of letting their lifestyles influence him.
Yeah, are you being an influence or are you being influenced? So in order to do what Jesus does, where he hangs out with the tax collector, prostitute, sinner, there has to be a certain groundedness, which we know that he has in terms of the Scripture, in terms of the dwelling of the Holy Spirit upon him, in terms of the frequent withdrawing to the solitary places for prayer. So there has to be a groundedness in order to engage in effective ministry. So there is a complex of things to deal with there. But consider the company you're keeping and why. Yes, John.
It seems to me there's two forms of discipline being discussed. One would come at the hand of the parent, at the end of the hand of the parent, maybe in discipline of the child, and also there's a discipline in how we live our life, like we talk about who we associate with. We try to discipline our the instruction that we get from our parents. It shapes our life, and then we become disciplined into living our life.
Yes, yes. So we use in English the word discipline in at least two different ways. We use it in terms of like, I received correction. I was disciplined for what I did and had to miss recess or something. We also mean in terms of disciplined life, like I am taking into account the discipline I've received and living my life accordingly. And Proverbs calls us to both of those things. And again, there's a cluster of words that kind of get at that. But there's also, and this is part of the challenge, when you're no longer under mother and father's roof and they're giving you what's clearly the teaching that I'm to honor and respond to have the kinds of voices in your life that can say the things that you need to hear, that I need to hear, that are words of discipline or correction peer-to-peer, or even sometimes not peer-to-peer. Someone that you would esteem to be, below you in some sense, socially or whatever, to receive correction, to receive the rebuke even from those folks. The Lord sometimes humbles us. The voices he chooses to be that voice of correction. Who are they to say it to me? Well, the Lord needed me to hear it, so it doesn't matter, And so there's a humbling even in that. I need correction, and I need direction and discipline, even if I don't particularly care for the source or the situation. Other comments or questions? Yes, Tasha. There you go. Whoever read, and you have some of your children here to hear that. Another one of those appearances things, right? If you love me, you'll be nice. And if you did something I didn't like, you were mean to me, I didn't like you. But actually there's a love that disciplines, that corrects, because the love cares about the beloved. So this does not excuse abuse here, okay? This is not like an endorsement of abusive forms of punishment or discipline. But there is an importance of disciplining. You don't discipline, and you're going to get a certain outcome from that. But you do, and you will. And so actually, love is what disciplines, and hate is what says, well, I'm not going to say anything bad. So I think it's especially important. I think culturally speaking, if you say anything mean about me or critical about what I think, say, or do, you must hate me. Well, that's not actually true. Actually, if you love me, you will, and you'll pray about it hopefully first and be patient and say it nicely, but you will say a word of correction because you love me and you care about me, and vice versa. And certainly that's true with our children. So there is an importance of discipline. It causes good things to happen. Yes, Norm. 22. A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. So Again, we're speaking proverbially here. Obviously, there have been good and wonderful people who have died without much, and there have been wicked people who have died with a lot. But what he's saying here is there's a certain wisdom that by your way of living, you end up having stuff to leave for your children, a legacy that's worthwhile. Meanwhile, the wicked, it ends up slipping out of their fingers, and the righteous end up with that wealth. This is certainly true from the standpoint of Revelation 21:22, where all the wealth and glory of all the kings and all the nations is brought into the holy city, where those who have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb from every tongue and tribe and nation are able to use all that for the glory of God. And you get the idea there are others to whom it originally belonged who don't. So all this glory, honor, wealth, talent, whatever, it is property of God, and of the Lamb will be used properly there. So you can't hang on to the wealth you gain in wicked ways. Those are just some thoughts about verse 22. Yes?
Well, why do you think it says you're basically your grandchildren rather than your children?
Yeah, why your grandchildren? I think to emphasize the lasting impact. The lasting impact. A life well lived right now has a multiple generation positive impact. A life lived in wickedness right now, and it won't even, what you have earned won't even be of benefit right away. It'll go over to the righteous. Again, this is a way of speaking proverbially, but certainly, and hopefully many of us in this room can think, not just economically, clearly that's probably happened as well, but also in terms of spiritual legacy. Some of our forebears and what they did generations ago has made a positive impact on us. Now, I've done both of my grandmother's funerals, and the first one, my mom's mom, I did the funeral at Third Baptist Church in St. Louis, which is where my parents grew up, and my aunts and uncles grew up, and a lot of my cousins grew up, and this sort of thing. So there I am doing this service and looking at this group of people that have had this multi-generation legacy on my whole extended family, and thinking about that faithfulness, that impact that it means. And a lot of those people I didn't know in person, but collectively a church makes an impact on people, and it ends up having a multiple generation thing. So here the conversation is particularly about wealth, but I think it works on multiple levels here, especially since Proverbs speaks about wisdom as a better thing than wealth itself, that there is a multi-generational impact to the life wisely lived and righteously lived, and that makes an impact down for multiple generations. And yeah. Other comments or questions or observations? I was just thinking as we were talking, if there was a verse from last week I forgot to make a big deal out of, and we should do that now. So since we're not in a hurry in Wednesday morning Bible study, go back to Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 25. Proverbs 12, verse 25. We had a great conversation last week, but at the end I was like, ooh, we didn't get to this one. Proverbs 12, verse 25. An anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up. An anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up. I just wanted to highlight that because a lot of people are obviously dealing with a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, a lot of fear, a lot of stuff. We talked about this some on Sunday in the sermon. People are dealing with this kind of stuff. The opportunity that we have to be a kind word and to be a lifter, an encourager in that way, and really the evangelistic opportunity there, when you develop the kind of relationship with somebody where when they're anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, whatever, you are the person who has the kind word, the encouragement, the support. That creates opportunities for relationship and for good news in that way of being. So one verse from last week I wanted to highlight and lift up that we did not get to. We can either talk more about that or go back to 13. I don't care. Either way. So much good stuff in here, Let's look at a few more here in Proverbs 13 then, a few verses that I highlighted. Back to verse 2, which we mentioned earlier. From the fruit of his lips a man enjoys good things, but the unfaithful have a craving for violence. That's another one of those not quite exact contrasts. From the fruit of his lips, that means his speech, what a person says. A man enjoys good things. You would think it would be what he puts through his lips. The food would bring the satisfaction, but it's actually his speech brings blessing and satisfaction. Meanwhile, the unfaithful have a craving to eat what? They have a craving for violence. An opposite there that's not quite opposite. What brings satisfaction to the man who does good? It's the fruit of his lips. It's the wise things come from his lips. But what does the unfaithful crave? And apparently never satisfied, is violence. So that's an odd pairing there, but kind of paints a fuller picture. The person who speaks well versus the person who pursues violence. Yes.
But can't you say that if you speak well to people, that there will be a better influence with them than if you speak evilly to them or wrong to them?
Yeah.
That will result
Sure.
in a violent response
Sure.
from the other.
Yeah, that could be a proverb as well, right? The way you speak to people will make an impact on the way that they relate with you. You know, and that's part of it too. With some of these teachings here in Proverbs 13, there's not just the impact for you. Like the fruit of his lips, the man, implying the wise man, will enjoy good things, and so will everybody else around him. You know, meanwhile, the unfaithful in the next line there, craving violence, that'll be bad for them, and we've already seen those who pursue violence will have it come upon their own heads in Proverbs, but it also is going to be negative for those around you. So the community impact is whispered there as well, I think, and other places here in Proverbs 13. Your way of being is not just about your long-term outlook, pro or con, but it's also about the impact made on people around you. How am I speaking and what am I pursuing? So the contrast in verse 7 is fruitful speech versus violent action. And what does that do for you? Yes, Norm.
I'm going back to 12:25.
12:25 again, Norm.
The anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers.
There you go. There you go.
I watch occasionally Emergency from the 70s.
Okay.
So I became an EMT and did those things.
There you go. So Norm watches Emergency for the 70s because he became an EMT about that time, and they didn't ask him to be on the show for reasons we have not figured out. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, 90% of patients you come into have anxiety for whatever reason.
Yes. Yes.
And they're nervous or anxious
Yeah.
or just totally out of it.
Yeah.
Calming them down by a kind word
Yeah.
did work.
Right. Right. Yeah.
If you could become their friend all of
Yeah.
a sudden,
Yeah.
they didn't worry about falling off the 50-story building or whatever it was.
Sure. Yeah. So Norm is talking about the context of the EMT work. Everybody's anxious when you're treating them in that situation. And so be able to have the calm and kind words. So speaking of so 12:25 is an example of 13:2. Fruitful lips include the calming words to the anxious person. Liz, if I can tell part of her story, just this week, going to the doctor, and one nurse in particular, just so calming. Or I think about Uncle Abby or Aunt Marta or whoever in our lives who are medical people who we love to text when we have a medical thing because they're just so calming. It's easy to get worked up about whatever, and they just have a calming demeanor. We talk about a good bedside manner, and that really is tremendously valuable. Were you going to say something else, Liz? Yeah.
It reminds me of one of the former presidents of Taylor, where we went to a
Yes.
alumni
Yeah.
event. You can share, you know what I'm talking about.
So Gene Habacher was president of Taylor after I graduated and during Liz's senior year and then for another 10 years. And Dr. Habacher was speaking at an alumni event we went to, and he said a good leadership absorbs the chaos, responds with calm, and gives back hope. Leadership absorbs the chaos, responds with calm, and gives back hope. He was actually quoting somebody else, but I don't remember who he was quoting, so I'll quote him. But there's such, to be able to step into a situation when there is chaos and to receive it calmly and offer a hopeful perspective is really valuable and a blessing. And each of us has benefited from people in our lives who have done that. And to have the kind of person you can call, whether it's a medical situation, whatever, who will do that. You can vent to that person your chaos, and they'll respond calmly and give back hope. That's good friendship. That's good pastoral care. That's just a good way to be. Fruitful lips that are a blessing for others around us. Other questions or comments? Yes, Bill.
Well, back several weeks ago when I had Harvard,
Yes.
I went into the facility up there, and everybody was very kind and
Yeah.
very cordial and all that, and that means a lot to you.
It means a whole lot.
Because you have anxiety. I don't care who you are.
Right.
You're going to have anxiety when you think about the fact that they're going to run something up inside your heart
Right.
while it's beating,
Right.
and do all this stuff
Right. There is no routine heart procedure when it's your heart.
when it's your right.
That's right.
And so with them being very kind and very cordial and calm and everything, you know, it calms you down in the
Right,
process.
right. So Bill's, yeah.
You know, the medical profession, if they pursue that type of thing, they're doing a lot more for the patients and setting their tone than anything else they can do.
Yeah, so Bill also appreciating setting the tone of calm from some of the staff you interacted with your heart procedure recently. And so thinking about the opportunity we have to do that, really to bring together 12, 25, and 13 too, and there's a lot of emphasis in your speech here actually in chapter 13 again. But thinking about my way of speaking and the impact I'm making and the opportunity to be a blessing. Yes, Liz.
And I'm just bringing this back to wisdom as we talk about it. It's the wise people that are able to do that.
Right.
Because they have perspective, they have
Right.
experience, they've lived through it. I mean,
Right.
medicine's not, me with my stomach thing that's lasting a little longer than normal, they're like, this is not that unusual. There's a lot of other people that are doing, you know, and
Right.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die.
Right, that's right.
And
That's
so
right.
it's just, you know, you have, when you
Right.
go through things,
Right.
gain that wisdom, then you're able to have more perspective for
Right.
people and give them that calm and that hope.
So this whole journey of wisdom that we invest in and we pursue over the course of years gets us to the place where we can offer words of wisdom. And I think about especially things that have stressed me out in ministry. I've always turned to older pastors who've been through stuff. And now that I'm old, Dennis, who's watching at home, will tell you I'm old now. There are some pastors that I've been able to share some stuff with because of that benefit of perspective. And I am better for some of the hardest things that have happened. And I'm wiser because of those things. And that doesn't mean that I've checked the box and arrived at wisdom or anything. But that journey, people who are pursuing wisdom are people able to say wise things. And people who haven't aren't in a position to really do that. And so this is all part of it. To pursue the way of wisdom is not just for your own unilateral benefit, but it also is to the benefit of those you interact with and get to speak with and interact with. So let me see. There are a couple others I was going to highlight here and see what we have. A lot of good ones here. I think about verse 5. Again, a not quite straight contrast there. You wouldn't think of this, but the righteous hate what is false. The wicked bring shame and disgrace. So false, shame, and disgraceful, or as Norm's translation said, stinky, which I think is literally the word for disgraceful there, it smells badly. They all are friends. They hang out together. So the righteous hate what is false, shameful, disgraceful, and the wicked bring about what is shameful and disgraceful, implied by being false. Another one of those word pictures that makes a paragraph out of 2 lines. On down to verse 10. This is interesting. The first half of verse 10, the syntax is a little ambiguous, my understanding, the translation into English, but the idea is clear enough. Pride or arrogance breeds quarrels, but wisdom is found in those who take advice. I think about the pride where I speak too quickly and cause a problem. And maybe you've done that, or you've heard rumors of people around the globe who've done that, right? I spoke too quickly and caused maybe not a quarrel, but at least strife, at least a problem because of that. Whereas wisdom is found in those who take advice, which means listening. So once again, and we've seen this several ways in Proverbs so far, the emphasis on the wise listen well, and the pride speak foolishly, and the outcomes of those directions are quite different. So again, an emphasis on your speech there in verse 10. A couple of other unusual ones here that we can deal with. Verse 12, which kind of parallels verse 19. Verse 12 here, we're still in Proverbs 13. Verse 12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is the tree of life. And then verse 19, a longing fulfilled is sweet to the soul, but fools detest turning from evil. That's an odd contrast down there in verse 19. But we have had the experience, I'm assuming all of us in this room have, of hoping for something that we've had to wait a long time for. And maybe you're in the middle of hoping for something right now and having to wait for a long time. And our hearts are sick from the longing. Doesn't necessarily, this is not a condemnation here, it's just the way it is. But a longing fulfilled when something you waited for a long time, and then it came, Then it came. It was a tree of life. Interesting again, tree of life shows up where? Genesis, first couple chapters, Revelation, last couple chapters, and Proverbs. Only places. So tree of life is a symbol for immortal, eternal, enduring life. We lose access to that in Genesis 3. We regain access to that in Revelation because of the blood of the Lamb. And then the only other place in Scripture this tree of life language shows up is Proverbs. Wisdom is a tree of life. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. And here, a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And maybe you can think of something you waited a really long time for, a good thing, a genuine thing you waited a long time for. And when it came, it was a life-giving thing. I'm thinking as I'm reading this, I know there are many of us in this room who have loved ones that we're concerned about because either they're distant from the Lord or their life situation right now is just not meaningful in the way it ought to be. And we've been praying for them and interceding for them, and we don't necessarily see much change, but to see the promise there, like the longing fulfilled is a tree of life, which implied means hang in there with the hope deferred, because when the longing is fulfilled, it'll be a beautiful, life-giving thing. So verse 12 is I think, a hopeful, encouraging verse. And then verse 19, dovetailing with it, a longing fulfilled is sweet to the soul, which is really the same idea as verse 12, but fools detest turning from evil. Why that contrast right there is puzzling to me. That does not seem like a straight contrast, unless we're suggesting that the fools are trying to bring about the longing in the wrong way, and it's an abomination to them to turn from evil. The implication might be if they would, they might get the sweet fulfillment from another way. Yes, Jeff.
I think
Verse 20, pretty straightforward.
He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but the companion of fools shall be destroyed.
There we go, to return. And we talked about that one a moment ago, but the company you keep impacts you. The wise and the fools. So who are you hanging out with? Choose your friends wisely. And I also think of Hebrews in the New Testament. Don't give up the habit of meeting together. There are some who say, well, I'm kind of a Lone Ranger Christian. It's okay. Me and my Bible and Jesus, we're good to go. But the fact that we need this community, like the reason we're gathering here isn't just something to do on Wednesday morning. You could find something else to do on Wednesday morning. But there's value in studying the Word as a community and being shaped by it together. And that's implicit. Verse 20 is implicit in all Christian gatherings. We're going to gather with other people who are wisely, fearing the Lord, pursuing wisdom, that sort of thing. And we're going to be shaped by that, as opposed to hanging out in the wrong places and being shaped by those kinds of influences.
One of the things that happened, Teresa and Sherry over the county jail.
Right.
Sheriff's Department for years, and one of the worst things that those people can do is once they've been incarcerated for something, and a lot of times do a bad habit.
Right.
Something like
Right.
that.
Right.
Is to go back and do the same people.
Right.
You
Right.
need to surround yourself with good people.
Right. So Jeff is talking about Teresa's experience, and Sherry and many others in our church have worked for the county sheriff's department in some capacity, the jail over the years. And to see many of those who are there are kind of the victims of Proverbs 13:20 gone wrong, hanging out with the wrong crowd and being drawn in the wrong way. And Tiffany and I were reading a Berenstain Bears book about this not long ago, right? Where you hang out with Too Tall Grizzly and he ends up having you rob Farmer Ben's pumpkins, and you get in trouble because you listen to the wrong voices, the wrong crowd. So thinking about that, who gains influence over my heart and my life? Who am I asking to shape, to involve in that shaping? And then, as Bill said, that is necessary in order to be able to minister effectively to people who maybe aren't so wise in following the Lord right now, but nevertheless need somebody to love on them. And so we've got to have that kind of groundedness, that kind of healthy and healing community as well, yes. Sherry on the front row.
This is not saying anything out of school, because Tony Ressler, who comes here, he started out with Bloomfield, and he went around and spoke to groups and told people, I had to get rid of all my old friends. They
Yeah,
were his
yeah,
friends.
yeah,
But he
yeah.
said, I had to surround myself with
Yeah,
good people
Yeah.
that would be helpful to me.
yes,
And so he ends up in a church family,
yeah.
and, I'm sure that he would be the first one to attest that's.
Sure. He and many others could testify, I had to find a new set of friends,
Yeah.
because the old set of friends was leading me to do these things that were illegal, get me in trouble and causing
And
problems.
your church family is the one that's gonna
Right. So we want to be the wise community from that angle. We want to be the wise community where people can come in and experience transformation. And I think but that's what requires the big heart. And that's what requires the willingness to be misunderstood, is to inviting in the person who maybe doesn't quite check all our boxes, but needs to be part of a Christ-loving, wise, and healing community. And being able to have the guts that Jesus does to hang in there and say, hey, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but it's the sick who need a doctor, you know.
A lot of people think, why would they do this?
Yes.
They don't know me.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
And that's a good opening to say, hey,
yes,
the Lord has blessed me, the Lord's blessed a lot of people, and, we're here for you, and we
Yeah.
want you to know that.
yeah, to be that supportive community, and people know that we're here for them. Verse 23 I wanted to talk about because it's a little bit different than anything else in the whole chapter. Verse 23, a poor man's field may produce abundant food, but injustice sweeps it away. A poor man's field may produce abundant food, but injustice sweeps it away. Now we're back to an observation, not a command. But there is this reality where the poor have the capacity to work hard, plant the field, till the field, everything like this, and we have an abundance, but some kind of injustice in the community, in the society, whatever, prevents them from actually enjoying the benefits of what they receive. I think this is an important nudge to us. It seems to me that poverty tends to be a polarizing thing, and we say, well, either it's the person's fault for their own foolish decisions, which clearly Proverbs testifies to. There is a segment of poverty because of my own foolish, arrogant decision-making. But here Proverbs also testifies to the community or structural realities, systems that can be unjust, and keep apparently an honest working poor person from actually benefiting from his or her own harvest. And so it invites us to consider, I'm not diagnosing the whole world at this point, we only have 4 minutes, but invites us to consider things that might just be wrong about the way the world works, that keeps people from in poverty from being able to enjoy the fruit of their labor. There are some things that are just unfair and unjust structures that keep the poor that are beyond their own control. So there's kind of this both and in Proverbs, this emphasis on individual responsibility, but also this acknowledgement of sometimes there are unjust realities that kind of keep the person in that poverty, and it's a bit of a trap. So that's not, this voice doesn't come out quite as often in Proverbs, but it does come out, and here it is in verse 23. So really more of a lamentation here in verse 23 than anything else. A poor man's field may produce a lot of food, but injustice sweeps it away. Other comments or verses we want to talk about here, or things that we noticed?
One of them, piggyback on that a little bit, is 8.
Yeah,
The second part of 8, the poor cannot respond to threat being removed.
yeah,
The way this one said, but in the same way that the poor in their field didn't have a way to stand up to
Yeah.
taking it away from them.
yes.
The poor didn't have a way to speak for themselves.
So verse 8 is a bit of a puzzle. Verse 8 also deals with the subject of poverty, but we have a hard time discerning what verse 8 means. The translators will talk about the difficulty of translating the back part of verse 8 there. A man's riches may ransom his life, but a poor man either hears no threat or won't listen to rebuke, or, and Tasha, say your translation again there?
The poor cannot respond.
Cannot respond. Yeah. So this has at least 3 directions of possible meaning for the back half of verse 8. Either it means the poor receives no threat because who cares, they don't have anything. Whereas the rich man has to deal with putting up a ransom because he got this problem. Or it means the poor are poor because they wouldn't listen to rebuke. And there's a segment of poverty, according to Proverbs, that is there because I won't listen to correction, I won't receive that. And then the other option there is that a poor person isn't even able to do anything about whatever because of their poverty. It cripples them in some way. So there's at least 3 different ways to take the back end of verse 8, and I really don't know how quite to take that other than the rest of Proverbs gives us some context on some of those things. But it's one of those situations where we just don't have a whole lot of context in that 2-liner to know how to handle that second half of verse 8. Yes, Charlotte.
My translation says the rich can pay a ransom for their lives, the poor won't even get credit.
Yes.
There's some advantage
Yeah.
in knowing that you're not gonna be the target,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you don't have, you're not gonna get kidnapped as likely as
Yeah. So
would that the kids of Elon Musk.
Yeah, so the interpretation of verse 8 in Charlotte's translation is that the poor don't even have to deal with the kind of difficult situation from which the rich might need to be ransomed. And so, what we don't know from the end of the second half of verse 8 is this a rebuke of the poor for not listening to rebuke? Is the lament of the poor for not being able to do anything about their situation? Or is it an exaltation of, hey, poverty is not so bad because there's these problems the rich have that you don't have? Now, each of those three would bear out biblically, broadly, what is verse 8 talking about? And the answer is that the textual history is uncertain and we just can't say for sure. So this is where some of a lot of the Bible, we have words or phrases, not quite sure how to handle it, but when you have a whole paragraph, a whole page, a whole flow, you can get the idea better of what's intended here. With these little two-liners, sometimes it becomes incredibly difficult to discern exactly what our meaning is going to be there. But yeah, that's another interesting verse as well. I'm trying to think. We already talked about some of the other ones I really want to make sure that we hit. So emphasis on speech is in here. Emphasis on response to discipline and the giving of discipline is in here. Emphasis on desires fulfilled or not fulfilled and the business of waiting. A lot to talk about here in Proverbs 13. Yes, Bill.
If you look at these, they appear to be a response to something else that's going on.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the rest of the story of what was going on beforehand that these were a response to, it's kind of hard to know exactly how they would be taken.
Right. Yeah.
But, like I said before here, I always thought that these were a response to people bringing issues to Solomon or whoever, and so he was given a response. These are a comment on whatever was being identified. So various types of things could have been going on, and he could have given this response as a proverb to fit.
Yeah. So Bill is saying, which is really what we don't know the context in which each of these arose. We know the kings would compile these kinds of sayings. We know that Solomon was both a creator and a compiler of these kinds of sayings, and he brings them together. And so where these originated from, we have wise sayings today that we have no idea where they originated from. You ever seen like some kind of saying and it'll say an ancient proverb? And we don't know who said that, Or some kind of saying and somebody doesn't know who said it, so we just say Mark Twain said it, right? Whether he said it or not. And we just kind of do this kind of thing. And we have these wise sayings that have been acknowledged by life experience to be wise and true and good, but we really don't know where they came from originally in many cases. We just kind of have said, yep, that rings true. So, although some of them do in fact come from the book of Proverbs itself, the spirit of the rod spoil the child, we just looked at that text a moment ago. But not knowing the full context does leave for some ambiguity and interpretation. So really, the way you interpret an individual proverb in Proverbs is with the context of the whole. And that's why the first 9 chapters are so important, laying that foundation for we're listening to wisdom, we're listening to folly, or we're listening to the teaching of father and mother. Do we have this fear of the Lord? How are we responding to these kinds of voices? And that sets the tone for how we're going to hear these things later on. So, what were we pointing to? Okay, you. Okay, yeah, go for it.
Verse 9, I was struck by the life of the godly is full of life and joy, the light of the wicked is snuffed out.
Yes. The light, this is verse 9, the light of the righteous shines brightly, but the lamp of the wicked is snuffed out. So one of the things I mentioned on Sunday, but as a church, we're praying this year, really, that we'll be the light shining in the darkness. Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. He says to us, you're the light of the world. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light, and so walk in the light as he is in the light. And so here we have another one of those that fits right within that theme. The way we're going to live is on display. That actually echoes back to 13, where is it? Well, I lost it. Anyway, one place in here talks about really you put on display your way of living. But anyway, at this point, it's verse 9. The light of the righteous shines brightly, and the lamp of the wicked is snuffed out. Your way of being is seen, and your way of living makes an impact. And so, again, that community whisper is all the way on through here. How are we going to live in such a way that we are seen, that the righteousness that the Lord is doing in us would be seen and will be shown, that his light will shine through us? Really, this is image bearing here, right? We want to reflect the glory of God. So we'll be living in such a way as to shine brightly. that might be a good note to end on today. We're going to pray, and then after I pray, we will not come back next Wednesday. We'll come back 2 weeks from today, and we'll do Proverbs 14 on August the 5th, I think, of August. I think is that Wednesday, give or take a day. So we'll do the 14th of the 14th chapter of Proverbs that first Wednesday of August. Next week, we'll take a week off for VBS. Let's pray together. Jesus, we pray that our light would shine brightly, and I thank you for these words today. I pray for a willingness to receive the correction you have for us today and in the week ahead. I pray for wisdom in our speech. I pray you would guard and shape our hearts, that our ways of speaking be an encouragement, uplifting, blessing, light, healing, calming to people around us. I pray you'd help us to see things as they really are and not as they appear to be. And I pray you'd help us to steward our resources wisely and have compassion on those who are hurting, maybe through no fault of their own, but just because of the way the world is right now. I thank you for your Spirit who speaks to us. I pray you continue to shape us by your word. And we pray your blessing on Bible school, and also that you bring us back here together 2 weeks from today to continue a journey through Proverbs. We pray all this in your precious name. Amen. Okay, so we'll see you in 2 weeks for more Proverbs chapter 14.